Hi, everyone. I'll give everybody a second to log in and then we will get started. I see the numbers ticking up, so when it slows down, we will dive right in. Okay, it's paused for a little bit, so let's go ahead and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second session of our April webinar series, Adapt and Thrive. My name is Jeff Johnson, and I'm the marketing leader for Randstad in the US. And I'm excited today to be joined by Jay Ferguson, Chief Legal Officer of Randstad North America, and Christine Wu, Senior Vice President for Randstad In-House Services. Today, we've scheduled this webinar for 30 minutes, and we want to answer as many questions as we can. We're going to be answering some questions we've commonly been getting from our clients, as well as questions you might have. So Jay is going to kick us off shortly, but if you have any questions for Jay or Christine, start sending them over in the chat or in the Q&A section. And like I said, we're going to try to get to as many as possible today. One housekeeping note before we dive in is that the topics and issues that we're going to cover today are for informational purposes only and are not offered as legal advice. Jay, thanks so much for joining us today. Could you introduce yourself and start our session off with some of the topics you've been hearing in 2025?
Yes, happy to, Jeff, and thanks for inviting me to participate in the webinar today. Compliance is certainly a hot topic, and we've been receiving lots of questions in that space. I think what is clear is that the Trump administration will focus on workplace enforcement that targets unauthorized workers and the employers that hire them. Those enforcement activities will come in the form of I-9 audits and I-9 raids by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. Now, under the Biden administration, ICE audits weren't necessarily a priority. They would typically conduct 200 to 300 ICE audits per year. Now, that number is expected to skyrocket under the Trump administration, with predictions being that there will be 12,000 to 15,000 I-9 audits per year. So employers should anticipate those, begin to prepare for those, and we'll discuss some recommended practices as this webinar moves along today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Christine, what are some of the conversations and challenges that you've been hearing from your clients so far in 2025?
Sure. No, thank you for having me today. And I would say, a lot of it's, as Jay mentioned, many of our customers are concerned about compliance and ensuring employment verification protocols are being followed consistently. Additionally, I've seen they're proactively working to identify the impact on their workforce holistically and the risk associated with potential business disruption and effects on production and their ability to deliver to their customers.
Great. Thank you both so much for those opening thoughts. I'm not seeing any questions come in yet, so I'm going to start with some questions we got last week and that we've been commonly receiving from our clients. But we would like to answer your questions live, so please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will get to as many as possible. One thing we've been hearing a lot about is the uptick in the number of ICE I-9 audits and raids. What are some steps, Jay, employers can take to prepare for those?
Well, Jeff, I'd say my first piece of advice is that employers really should treat I-9 compliance as part of their normal business operations, as opposed to some administrative task that any employee could complete. You'll want to treat that or have those tasks managed by a centralized team that receives training before they are asked to perform those I-9 duties. Another recommendation is that employers should put in place a written plan now that anticipates these I-9 audits and raids by ICE. And in that written plan, you'll want to include things along the lines of who will be responsible for communicating with the ICE investigator. Also, who will be responsible for gathering the documents to be produced to ICE. Those will include the company's I-9s, the articles of incorporation, and whatever other documents are requested. Also in that written plan, you'll want to indicate that your legal team, so your in-house legal department, should be engaged at the onset of that investigation, so they can help guide you through the process. And one final thought for that written plan is that it really should indicate that if it's an I-9 raid where there is an investigator on site, that one of your in-house attorneys should be present for all interviews of company witnesses, of company employees. One final thought in terms of prep for these potential raids and audits. Use this time to establish a process where you are auditing internally your own I-9s. Ideally, those audits would be conducted under the attorney-client privilege, and use that time or those audits to detect errors in your I-9s. Those may be paperwork errors that can be corrected in a lawful manner. But it's best to detect those now, correct those in the right way now before that ICE audit occurs. Also, with those audits, it's a great chance to see what types of additional training may be required for the team involved in the I-9 process. So those are some thoughts, Jeff, in terms of prep for the audits that may occur.
Okay. One question I do remember from last week that I thought was interesting is, does the size of a company influence the likelihood of being audited for I-9 compliance?
Yeah, I remember that. It came in at the very end. We didn't have time to answer that one. So glad we're including that today. So the answer is no. The size of the company really doesn't play a role there, because all employers across the U.S. have the responsibility to complete and retain I-9 forms. So theoretically, any employer could be subjected to an ICE audit. With that being said, though, Jeff, my thought is that employers that historically have employed a higher number of immigrant workers face a greater likelihood of an ICE audit. And there are specific industries that we're hearing about that face a greater likelihood of an I-9 audit. Those industries are agriculture, construction, hospitality, manufacturing, and food processing. So those 5 industries, I think, have a slightly higher chance of an I-9 audit.
Okay, I see a question here from Andrew, and it's a two-parter. During an audit, will an employer be asked to produce copies of the I-9 documents used when the I-9 was completed? And the second part is, should those I-9 documents be stored in an employee's personnel file or somewhere else?
Okay, two questions, so lots to unpack there. Let me answer the first one. So, and I'll back up at a high level. Are employers required to keep the I-9 identification documents that are inspected as part of the I-9 completion process? No, they're not required to keep those. But they can decide to keep those. It's the option of the employer. My thought there is, if you decide to keep those I-9 supporting documents for one employee, you really should keep them for all employees. The only exception there is that employers that are enrolled in the federal government's E-Verify program must retain those I-9 ID documents. And so to answer your specific question, will an employer be required to produce those? Well, it all depends on the specific language of the ICE subpoena or the ICE notice of inspection. But I think employers could reasonably anticipate that the subpoena will request those from the employer. And could you repeat the second part of that question?
Yeah, let me go back and read it one more time. Um, it's around where those documents should be stored, a personnel file or somewhere else.
Okay, so you're talking about the ID documents that were inspected as part of the I-9 process. Let me back up and give thoughts on maintaining the I-9s themselves. So employers really should keep the I-9 itself in a separate file for each employee, separate than the employee's personnel file. You don't want those two files commingled. If your company does keep the ID supporting documents, those should be kept separately from the personnel file as well, and in the specific I-9 file for that employee. One last thought there. There are lots of companies out there that use an electronic I-9 process. So for that, if your company does keep the ID documents that were inspected, those should be attached to the I-9 that's electronically stored, as opposed to being kept somewhere else in a personnel file.
Okay. Christine, I promise I'm gonna get to you in a second. Just a lot of legal questions right now. Somebody is asking, an anonymous person, about penalties employers face for mistakes made during the I-9 process.
Yeah, so the types of penalties that an employer could face really depend on whether the I-9 violation is a paperwork violation, or whether it's a violation for hiring of unauthorized workers. For paperwork violations, those fines tend to be a bit lower. They range from $281 per violation to $2,789 per error. Then, with respect to penalties for hiring unauthorized workers, the amount of the penalty all depends on whether it's the employer's first offense, second offense, or third offense, or higher. The penalties get quite steep for third offenses or greater, and those can range from $8,369 to $27,894 per violation. And one last thing to mention there, in terms of penalties, employers can also face criminal penalties for these types of I-9 errors. So those could include felonies and potential imprisonment for knowingly hiring unauthorized workers.
One thing you mentioned last week that blew me away, and so I'll ask that question myself, is, those are hefty numbers, but is there a particular case where an employer, faced penalties for I-9 non-compliance?
Yeah, there are lots of articles and press releases from ICE out there about prior cases, prior investigations of employers. I would say the case that gets the most press involves a national privately held tree pruning company. They were subjected to an ICE investigation over their hiring practices, and that investigation lasted 6 years, believe it or not. The allegation there was that senior management remained willfully blind to who was being hired. They just weren't involved in the hiring process. And they left unchecked the lower level managers who were accused of knowingly hiring unauthorized workers. So that case resolved with the company facing penalties of $95 million. So yeah, that's, to my knowledge, the largest of these cases. One other comment about the employer there, they maintained a very decentralized I-9 process. So the folks who were involved in completing the I-9s were spread out across the country, as opposed to a recommended best practice of having a centralized team manage that process and providing training to that centralized team before they begin completing I-9s, give them training on exactly what is required.
Great. And Christina, I actually realized I missed a question from Marta that is right up your alley, and it's around the responsibilities of the temp staffing company. So current customers of Randstad and current talent working at our sites, what are we doing to make sure we're compliant and planning for any audits?
Sure, no, that's a great question. We in the field have participated in the E-Verify process for a long time. And Randstad overall has implemented additional processes to regularly review our I-9 compliance across all of our sites. I would say this includes both manual and automated checks to ensure that the I-9 forms are complete and accurate. I would also say, we're continuously training our HR and compliance teams to ensure that we're well versed in current requirements and procedures. The training is ongoing and covers all aspects of immigration compliance. And our systems are designed to ensure compliance with I-9 and E-Verify requirements to minimize risks of non-compliance during any potential ICE audits. I would say this includes our use of technology to track and manage I-9 forms, and the ability to identify any potential errors or omissions, from our team's submissions. And let's see, I would also, as another thought, I would say that we've developed and implemented a formal response plan for our field teams to follow in the event of a raid or audit, at one of our locations or sites. And this plan includes specific steps to take and contact Randstad legal points of contact, as Jay mentioned earlier, who will work in tandem with our teams in the field to ensure that all audit requirements are met. Our goal is always to be proactive and not reactive in as many situations as possible.
I see a question here from Marjorie. If you do have a question, you can put it in the chat or the Q&A box. So feel free to do either, Marjorie. We'll get to it if we can. Jay, from a legal perspective, what safeguards does Randstad have in place to ensure the talent we're providing is compliant?
Well, Christine nailed it. She touched on a lot of the steps already. I will say that employment verification has always been a priority for Randstad. So for each and every newly hired temporary worker, Randstad and the worker complete, and then Randstad retains a Form I-9. That I-9 verifies the individual's identity and authorization to work in the U.S. And Christine mentioned this as well. Also, Randstad, for more than a decade, has been enrolled in the federal government's E-Verify program. That's been a very helpful tool for us, and we're enrolled in that on a nationwide basis. One other point to mention there, Jeff, when one of our clients requests it, Randstad can secure a criminal background screen or a drug test for newly hired temporary workers. I should have mentioned earlier, we also provide comprehensive training on the I-9 and E-Verify processes to our centralized team who are responsible for managing that process.
I've been hearing a lot about E-Verify in 2025. So Jay, you mentioned that Randstad has been enrolled in the E-Verify program. Can you provide more details about about that program?
Yeah, happy to. So the E-Verify is a web-based platform that is offered by the federal government. It's a really neat tool that compares the information on an I-9 form to government records to confirm an individual's identity and authorization to work in the U.S. It's optional. Employers are not required to enroll in E-Verify. The exceptions there, though, are federal contractors are required to enroll in E-Verify, and some states require employers in those states to enroll in E-Verify as well. The good thing about the E-Verify tool, if an employer uses it and runs a newly hired employee through the tool and obtains a work authorized result then a rebuttable presumption is created that the employer did not knowingly hire an unauthorized worker. So that can be extremely important in this day and age where compliance seems to be getting so much more attention. I will say it's been fascinating to watch the number of employers who have enrolled in E-Verify has really grown exponentially in recent years. Last report I saw, upwards of 1.3 million employers in the U.S. are enrolled in that program.
Christine, I want to get back to you. Somebody is mentioning about their current staffing provider. So, the question I'll ask is, if somebody's been working with their staffing provider for a while, why should they consider switching to Randstad?
No, that's a great question. So I would say Randstad offers an industry-leading compliance practices and rigorous protocols to train our team in order to minimize risk. Our commitment to compliance is unmatched in the staffing industry. And I would also say that our proactive approach to immigration compliance ensures that our clients remain protected from costly violations and disruptions. We work closely with our clients to identify and address potential compliance issues before they become a problem. As I said earlier, trying to be proactive and not reactive in our approach. Our team at Randstad also has compliance experts that's available to us to strategize with clients about I-9 compliance and can answer questions about these topics for temporary workers that we place at our client locations. And also, as part of our Partner for Talent focus, we are committed to providing a great experience for all talent who apply or work through Randstad. Our technology platform supports multiple languages and allows talent to control their application and onboarding process to include the I-9 verification that enables Randstad to get talent to work quicker and results in a shorter time to fill for our clients.
We're getting a lot of good questions. So if we don't get to your question today, I apologize. And this one is less of a question and I'm reading it, so I'll make it into a question from Sherry. It is about E-Verify, and Sherry said she worked with a staffing company that said they used E-Verify, but later found out that they did not use E-Verify. So I guess the question I would turn it into is, how can a company determine if its staffing provider is using E-Verify? And Jay, I'll send that one over to you.
Okay, yeah, great question. I've seen that a couple times in recent weeks. So the answer is that the federal government's E-Verify website is a very helpful tool. So anybody can go to that website, type in a company's name, and determine whether that company is enrolled in E-Verify. So that tool will not only show you whether the company is enrolled, it'll tell you when they enrolled. It'll tell you whether they have a good status in the E-Verify program, and it will also show you all of the locations where that company is enrolled. So it could potentially be a red flag if a company is enrolled in certain locations, but not others. But I would say that to answer the question, that the E-Verify website itself is a great tool.
This question came in from an anonymous person. What are some steps a company could take to evaluate if its current staffing provider operates a compliant I-9 program? So, Jay, I will pass that one to you.
Yeah, there are several things that you can do in evaluating a provider's compliance in this area. First, I would ask them, do they regularly conduct audits, internal audits of their own I-9 practices? Also ask them about the formal training that they provide to their employees. When does that training occur? Make sure that it occurs before those individuals are tasked with handling I-9 duties. Also ask them, how often that training occurs. Do they retrain employees on any sort of regular basis? Per the comment from a couple minutes ago, ask them if they're enrolled in the federal government's E-Verify program, and then take those steps I mentioned to confirm that they are in fact enrolled. Jeff, I'd say that the consequences for non-compliance in this space can be severe. You know, we've talked about the monetary penalties, the potential for criminal penalties. So if you are working with a staffing firm, you really should be kicking the tires and evaluating their compliance in this space. Too much can go wrong if there is not a focus on compliance.
Thanks, Jay. I actually popped in the E-Verify site in the chat, so if everybody, hasn't seen it, go check it out, bookmark it. And Christine, because I started with Jay, I wanted to end with you because we're coming up to time, and it's about how quickly can Randstad take on new clients or ramp up in a new location.
Gotcha. No, certainly in the field, we're used to quick ramp ups, taking on new clients. One of the first things that we would do is to leverage, our two-way digital marketplace that has over 775,000 pre-qualified candidates. We'd also couple that with our standardized implementation methodology, so we could rapidly adjust to any new client needs, make certain compliance requirements, and make sure that they're all met, and ensure, most importantly, that business continuity throughout this process and ramp up is there. I will share, recently we had a client who became aware of some compliance issues in one of their largest facilities in Illinois. And as a result, they came to us, asked Randstad to step in and help take over an existing supplier's temporary workforce and help assess of what's going on with almost, I would say, several hundred talent out there. So, we quickly jumped in, assessed the onboarding compliance related to these particular workers, determined the impact of any non-compliance issues, while also ensuring no business or productivity impact, was made to the client. These steps needed to be completed within a very quick time period of 2 weeks. So, I would say the results that we achieved were that we transitioned about 225 talent from the incumbent supplier in 3 days, and then sourced, recruited, and screened and onboarded over 600 new talent to replace the other workers over a 12-day time period.
Great. Actually, one more question, and I'll answer this. And it came in from Jennifer. And we do actually have a Randstad 30-day onboarding compliance guide that we're going to be sending out to anybody that attended this webinar. So be on the lookout for that. We're making some final touches to it, but it should go out tomorrow, earlier next week. So Jennifer, thanks for that reminder. We have 2 minutes left, so I want to close this out. I do want to say as a final reminder, the topics and issues we just covered are for informational purposes only and are not offered as legal advice. Christine, some of those questions make me think, if any of the individuals on this call might have some specific questions about their account or might be interested in learning more about how to work with Randstad, what should their next steps be?
No, absolutely. We would love to connect with you. So if you know who your current representative is, you can reach out to them and let them know you attended today and would like to chat further. If you have questions and do not know, who your representative would be, please feel free to answer the follow-up email that's going to be sent after this call, where you can book a meeting with someone. Let us help you be proactive and not reactive in staffing situations that will arise. We're here to help. So we want to be your partner for talent. If that means we can help you as a current client or bring you on as a new client to make sure your 2025 is productive and thriving, we are here for you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Unfortunately, there were some questions that we did not get to, and some questions on different topics besides immigration. But the good news is that next Wednesday, April 16th, at 1 p.m., Jay is going to be coming back with our Chief Commercial Officer, Greg Dyer, to do a longer extended hour-long session around broader topics that we've been seeing so far in 2025 and how employers can best adapt and thrive with Randstad as your partner of talent. So please check that out, register for it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please be in touch with any questions you might have.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.